get rid of me. I mean, every method you can think of, every method under the sun, none of it worked. They finally decided, we can't get him, let's blow the whole place up, remove everybody who's currently serving, and in the process, you get him too. So they put on the ballot a measure that said members of the legislature could only serve in the lower house 6 years and in the Senate 8 years, i.e. 3 terms of 2 in the lower house, 2 years of 4 in the upper house. And that's it. Once you've done 6 years, and you're barred for life. They could not make it retroactive because I already had in, obviously, more than 6 years. But going forward, it would happen. Well, we had to contest against that. I assumed the responsibility to raise the money for all of the television and all of the radio. The Senate assumed the responsibility for the newspaper ads and the direct mail. The last piece of mail we were to send out was a letter from Ronald Reagan. And the letter said very simply, I am against term limits. If we did not have term limits, I would still be your president. Please do not support term limits. Dynamite letter. Gotta be worth 5% of the vote with Ronald Reagan, particularly since we were gonna send it to high propensity to vote conservative Republicans. And we figured that and all the libertarians, and we figured we could win it. Unfortunately for me, my counterpart in the Senate, a fellow named David Roberti, who had the 400 grand that it took to send out this piece, operated on the theory the polls were so bad that he would be wasting 400, and he was going to hold that 400 to help his own personal campaign for city council or for something else. So at the 11th hour, he didn't send the mailer out. Therefore, term limits passed, and I'm doomed to 1996 to exit the legislature. So were a number of other members. The 1994 statewide campaigns came along, and about 8 of my members of the 47 Democrats, 8 of my members chose to try to find some other job in 94 and not wait to be fired in 96. They chose to run statewide, some against each other, and unfortunately, they were all districts in which Republicans would win if that Democratic incumbent was not the candidate. Whether it was Santa Barbara, whether it was Los Banos, all the farm country, it was just a total disaster. So in 94, we suffered a defeat. The cigarette industry, in particular, Philip Morris, spent a lot of money against one of our candidates, a woman named Betty Carnett, and they got her in the 11th hour. When the dust settled, I had 39 members of the Assembly re-elected out of 47, and the Republicans had 41, which makes a total of 80. They were ecstatic. They had finally, after all these years, after 14 years, they'd finally gotten the one person they'd been trying to get for all 14 years. Well, my membership obviously was so-called devastated, except that in my entire career, over the whole time period in my career, I always looked to help people in the world of politics who were being shunted aside, mistreated, and despised by everybody else. And Republicans are famous for dumping on people who didn't adhere totally to the party line. And they had about 3 people in their caucus who had gotten re-elected that were Willie Brown devotees. I didn't need but one of them to come away, because you see, there was one Republican who was not qualified, had gotten elected. He filed for the state assembly for his old seat, and he was running. A vacancy occurred with a death in the middle of his election for re-election. He chose also to run for that seat, which means that was the last under oath preference of his choice. And I thought that ought to be examined by the membership as to whether or not we would seat him. He did one more thing that helped my case substantially. The Senate organizes ahead of the Assembly. He had been elected to the Senate in that seat that was vacant by death. He went over and participated in House organization of the Senate before coming back over to the Assembly to help oust me. And on the way over there, he told the press that he was doing that because his last act in the Assembly would be to get rid of the nemesis of all of his life, one Willie Brown. He had no idea that he was establishing the total foundation for making him ineligible to vote. If he's ineligible to vote, then the House is 79 members, which means the Republicans at that stage of the game only have 40. And all I need to do is have one of my 3 loyal Republicans who've been mistreated step across the aisle and vote for me. And that's exactly what occurred. In order to ensure that that would happen, the guy that was the guy who wanted to do it, Paul Horcher, was a good friend. We knew that when the Republicans stopped celebrating after the election night in November and start counting by December 1st, they might manage somehow to lift his mortgage or do something that kind of forces you to change your vote. Well, Paul Horcher, we found a friend in Korea that would host him. He had never been to Korea. So we sent him to Korea with no forwarding address and no evidence of anybody being able to find him. And he was to stay there till December 1st, which was the day in which the vote was to be taken. The Republican leadership had an inauguration ceremony with a red carpet and balloons and all that stuff the Sunday night before the vote. They were so certain that Jim Brulte was going to win the speakership. And lo and behold, at 12 noon, on the date in which the speakership was to be done, clerk, we had a challenge to the 1 seat. And the clerk, whom I had hired over the objections of the Republicans, I got the vote to hire the clerk, only African American ever as clerk. He was married to this Republican woman who said she wouldn't have a wife if he did anything to help Willie Brown. Well, this young black man was in a quandary, and he wouldn't rule on the challenge to the seat. And lo and behold, we got into a lockdown. Well, the next day, he allegedly collapsed and was hospitalized, and therefore unable to do his duties as a clerk. Under the rules, it clearly says the most tenured member becomes the clerk, even though he is a member. I was the most tenured member. And it didn't take me but 38 seconds to accept the challenge to Mr. Mountjoy, the Republican who had 2 seats. Once his vote was discarded, we now had 40 to 39 my favor because Paul Horcher had pounded the table and announced that he was for Willie Brown. And thereby the Republicans fled the Capitol to try to bar us from having a quorum. It takes 41 of 80 to make a quorum. So for almost a month, we couldn't get a quorum to institutionalize this fabulous result. And so what I did, knowing how in need those Republicans were, I cut off all sources of income from the state to every Republican member and every one of their staff people on the basis they had abandoned their position. And it didn't take them about 15 days of people demanding payment before they came in and said, okay, we give. We're coming tomorrow morning to make a quorum, and as soon as you're re-elected speaker, is there any way you can accelerate our checks? And of course, we accommodated their request, and I continued as speaker until I decided to run for mayor. Now, they, of course, immediately instituted a recall of poor Paul Horcher. And as soon as they had recalled Paul Horcher, we switched horses and got the late Doris Allen, a Republican, whom they'd also installed. My going off to become mayor, I'm leaving the speakership. We promptly elected Doris Allen speaker, a Republican woman with all Democratic votes. And that really pissed them off. I mean, beyond belief. So as long as I was there, we always controlled the speakership. And the Republicans to this day has never understood it.